Hey guys, how's it going? I'm going to go ahead and go through the study guide video for test number 5. Let's go ahead and get started. You should be following along with me on your own study guide and filling out the different questions and charts I have for you. So we're going to start with understanding kind of what caused the United States involvement in both World War I and World War II. And we're going to do this together, looking at World War I and World War II at the same time. And the reason why we're going to do this is because sometimes the understanding of World War I and World War II can kind of seem too similar and it confuses students. So I actually think we should embrace that, kind of look at it side by side so you can understand the nuances and the difference between the two of them. So let's start first with World War I. So World War I is going to start in 1914 and ends in 1918. But the United States at the start of the war was neutral. They were not involved at all with the war. However, their neutrality is going to be threatened. So because of that, the threatened neutrality is going to be something that's going to make it not effective. And the biggest thing that threatened the neutrality of the United States in World War I was unrestricted submarine warfare. An example of unrestricted submarine warfare was the Lusitania sinking. Now, unrestricted submarine warfare was where Germany basically just shot at all ships within a defined war zone that they created. The Lusitania was a very luxurious cruise liner that was sunk by a German submarine. Now, this did stop Germany from doing this, but even outside of that, there are other examples of the United States not really being neutral. Woodrow Wilson, who was the president at the time, openly favored the British and the French, who were part of the Entente and not the Triple Alliance. And multiple times, Wilson called this a war for democracy. And so therefore, it kind of shows that they were not incredibly effective. But the thing that is going to lead to the United States actually joining in on the war is going to be submarine warfare starting up again and the Zimmermann telegram. So as I said, with the Lusitania sinking, Germany stopped its unrestricted submarine warfare, but they were losing the war. So by 1917, they realized that they had to continue this unrestricted warfare to have a chance to win. They knew the United States would be mad. So they sent a telegram to Mexico saying that they should declare war on the United States to distract the United States so that they could not send troops over to fight Germany. This was an aggressive action that the United States is going to use to go to war. All right, so now let's move to World War II. World War II is going to break out around 1939. It's debated kind of what you want to call officially the start of World War II, but we're going to say 1939 ends in 1945. But again, to start, the United States is neutral. So this is a big similarity between World War I and World War II. Now, the United States really took their neutrality seriously in the early parts of the war. The lead up to the war, they had the Neutrality Act that said that the United States could not sell anything. But outside of that, the United States is going to become less and less neutral. There are two examples. One is the Cash and Carry Act, and the other is the Lend-Lease Act. Both of these actions are going to favor France and Great Britain again in selling them weapons and supplies. With the Lend-Lease Act, they're not even going to sell weapons. They're going to loan weapons to Great Britain. And so therefore, it's not going to necessarily show that they're neutral, even though they said that they were. Now, the spark that's going to lead them to the war is going to be Pearl Harbor being attacked by the Japanese. The Japanese are going to do a preemptive attack on the United States, and the United States declares war after that. Now, let's talk about after World War I, what took place. Wilson, again, the American president, is going to come out with this idea called the 14 points. And this was his plan to end wars forever. That's what the 14 points are. He was quoted as calling it peace without victory, meaning that basically everyone wins, no one loses, or no one wins either. And so therefore, it's a very neutral peace. And then therefore, we don't need any more wars. Of the 14 points, there's only two that you really need to know. The first is the League of Nations. This was going to be a peacekeeping organization made up of most of the countries in the world, which would allow for them to have discussions outside of making war plans with each other, trying to solve their problems through words. The second is self-determination. Self-determination is the idea that countries should rule themselves, so therefore no more colonization. And this was somewhat of a controversial idea, although colonization was becoming less and less popular. But again, self-determination, League of Nations. Now, Europe's going to respond to the 14 points kind of with a half-hearted measure. So they're going to agree to the League of Nations, but not to the rest of the 14 points. And the reason for why this was because France specifically, but also Great Britain, really wanted to hurt Germany after the war. So they made Germany adopt ideas like Article X, Article 10, which stated that Germany had to take full responsibility for the war, pay for the war. That is not peace without victory. So therefore, Germany is going to become very, very bitter towards this, which actually is one of the things that leads to World War II. So Europe very much rejects most of the 14 points. America also rejects most of the 14 points. They don't really want Germany to be punished, but they want to remain isolationist. They don't want to be involved in any more foreign wars. So because of that, they do not sign the Treaty of Versailles and they do not join the League of Nations. So both the United States and Europe are going to reject the 14 points. Part of the reason why the United States wants to remain isolationist is because they are fearful of immigration at this time. In the 1920s, immigration is going to drop very, very fast, and this is in large part due to the first Red Scare. This is a fear of European immigrants bringing over communistic ideas or radical ideas. Radical ideas were usually anarchist ideas or anarchy, the idea that all government is bad, so therefore there shouldn't be a government. And some examples of this would be immigration acts like the 1921 Quota Act, which dramatically dropped how many European immigrants were allowed. That was reduced even further in 1924 with the Immigration Act. And then there are also these things called the Palmer Raids, which is where the Attorney General is going to target communists and basically kick communists out of the country. All right. Now, going into the 1920s is a decade full of change. We're going to look at a couple of those changes. So the first major change is going to be something we didn't talk about too much in class. So if we didn't talk about too much in class, and I'm talking about it right here, you can almost guarantee that this is going to be on your test. And this has to do with workmanship, the type of work that you did. So before the 1920s, a lot of factory work was done. Work in factories was done, but there was also this idea called apprenticeship. An apprenticeship is kind of what you're seeing in these pictures right here. It's where there would be one craftsman and they would be working a very specific trade, and they'd get very, very good at this trade, and then they would take on an apprentice. This would usually be a father-son relationship. So if your father made shoes, then you made shoes, and your grandfather made shoes, and your great-grandfather made shoes. So you came from this long descendant line of shoemakers. So you're very passionate about it. It's the only thing that you've ever done. It's multi-generational. It's part of your family. That was before the 1920s. Well, after the 1920s, we know that the assembly line is going to become very popular because of Henry Ford. So because of that, all of these people are going to go out of business, and you're not going to make shoes anymore in a house by yourself that your father also worked in. Instead, you're going to work in a factory, and it's going to be mass produced, and you're going to be a well-oiled machine. So there's no more individuality in this. That's all stripped away, and you might only be responsible for making one part of the shoe, maybe the holes where the laces go into. And so therefore, it becomes much more meaningless, and job satisfaction is going to drop. Now, the second thing that's going to really change is consumerism. America is going to become a much more materialistic society. People are going to want to buy things. This is because of advertisements on the radio. You could buy things on credit. Chain stores are going to start, such as Sears. All of this is driving this idea that you should buy stuff. And part of this is because people are making money, so that's a good thing. But there's this other part of it that's kind of a little bit more maybe sinister, which was that you're trying to just compel you to buy things that you don't necessarily need, excess, which is something that the United States could say is still a defining feature of its culture. And so because of that, there are going to be critics of this, and you need to know the major critic is a guy named F. Scott Fitzgerald. He was a writer. He wrote The Great Gatsby, and he saw all of these, what he basically defined as shallow people or hollow people, trying to fill their life with these goods, but these goods couldn't do it. Now, the radio is also going to change things. It's going to create a common culture, and it's also going to be a new source for advertisements. Again, these advertisements are going to be used to drive this consumerism. And then the final thing is the Harlem Renaissance. It's this massive celebration of African American culture through writing and through music. And you might want to add to this that jazz comes out of the Harlem Renaissance. Now, because of all of this consumerism going on in the 1920s, we're going to go through a massive Great Depression. So you need to know what started the Great Depression, and you need to know the causes. Now, just so you know, I'm not very clear on the study guide about this, but you also need to know the causes. So the starting event is the stock market crashing. People were overproducing things. Companies were making too much stuff, and people had bought all the stuff that they needed. And so because of that, they had all of this excess material, and no one wanted to buy it. Because no one wanted to buy it, the stock market's going to crash. So the causes of the stock market crashing are going to be overconsumption and underproduction. Sorry, switch that. Overproduction, underconsumption. So this, again, this idea that people don't need to buy things anymore. People buying things on credit, specifically stocks, that's a big, big thing, but buying lots of things on credit. And then all of a sudden the banks are going to fail. People were taking money out of banks for loans, and then they couldn't pay those loans back and the bank fails. And that all starts the stock market crashing, which leads to the Great Depression. Now, who is blamed for this? Herbert Hoover is going to be blamed for this, the president. Now, he did not respond very well, but the blame for him causing the Great Depression is silly. This was something that had been going on years before Hoover was even president. And an example of this were these these quite large shanty towns or temporary settlements, homeless shelters, basically, that were built in these huge parks in cities like Central Park, and they called them Hoovervilles. Now, the next president is going to be Franklin Roosevelt, and he is going to advertise his solution to the Great Depression as the New Deal. And the New Deal did a lot of things. It's actually somewhat debated, hotly contested, if the New Deal actually solved the Great Depression, but it did do a lot of specific things. So let's go through those. The first thing that it did is Black people are going to start to vote Democrat. Before 1930, most Black people voted Republican because the Republican Party was the party that Abraham Lincoln belonged to. Now, they voted Democrat, even though a lot of the New Deal programs are going to leave them out. An example would be the Tennessee Valley Authority. The TVA was a big New Deal job program that tried to create jobs for creating dams in the South. Black people were most likely left out of those deals, but even though they were left out, they still started to vote Democrat. Unions get way, way, way more powerful. They start to support workers way more. The Wagner Act allows for more unions to be created. This is very, very different than the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age was 1880 to 1900. We talked about the Pullman strike, which was this big industrial strike that the government actually shut down. They didn't even allow it to happen. Now the government is supporting unions. And that leads us overall to a change in how government and the economy works. Pre-New Deal, pre-progressive era, during the Gilded Age, laissez-faire economics was the big common thing. And laissez-faire economics was hands-off. No matter what's hurting, no matter how bad it is, the government shouldn't intervene in the economy. It's kind of like if you saw an animal wounded in the woods. Doesn't matter how loud it's yelling, you need to just let that animal be and let it die. Well, now you have laissez-faire economics gone, and now there's government intervention, which is where the government's going to intervene directly with the economy. So you would go try to help that animal in the woods. And this is probably the biggest change in the government. Now, all of a sudden, they're supposed to kind of be the protectors of the people and help the economy when it's going bad. Whereas pre this, during the Gilded Age, it's the complete opposite. All right. For World War II, you need to know a lot of the effects that are going on at home. Now, for the effects, we're going to kind of break this down into a couple different groups. Let's first start with Black people. Black people and women are actually going to have very similar things happen. They're both going to be offered tons of factory jobs. So you need to know that Black people and women both are given a lot of factory jobs. And because of that, there is a greater sense of equality for Black people and women during World War II. Not everything, though, was good in the society. Japanese Americans are going to be heavily blamed and discriminated against because of Pearl Harbor. They were put into internment camps with Executive Order 9066, and this order was actually upheld with Katsuma versus the United States. Kuramatsu versus the United States. All right, for the economy, this is huge. The World War II ended the Great Depression. World War II is going to end the Great Depression for the economy, and everyone worked for the war effort. So an example of this is the War Production Board, this massive government entity that basically told businesses, you're not making cars anymore. Instead, you're going to make airplanes and tanks. That was an example with Ford. So everyone is going to be working for the government. This is going to cause the government to go in massive amounts of debt, but it did actually pull us out of the Great Depression because so much money was all around. All right, the last thing you need to know about is the fallout of World War II. The fallout is going to be the Cold War. This is a rivalry between the US and the USSR. And all you need to know is that the goal for the Cold War for the US was to stop communism.
Good morning. Good morning, Maynard Jackson family. We thank you if you're